So let's take a look at the inheritance part of it. So let's assume that we have class B, okay, which wants to inherit from class A. So the keyword is extends A. So class B inherits all the members that are available in class A, plus it can add on its own features, that is attributes and characteristics. So let's assume that we have float f, okay, and here we have void disp with its functionality. If this is class B, you create an instance of class B again. The constructor of class B gets executed. Now what happens out here is, since we have a default constructor in class B, and let's assume that we have not written any constructor in class A as well, which means for both the classes we have a default constructor, right? So when you create an instance of class B, the compiler has already inserted the default constructor, and within that default constructor, the first thing that happens is it invokes the parent constructor. So the execution of the parent constructor gets done first, and then comes back to the child constructor to further execute the instructions that you might have specified in case you have written any constructor. So let's assume that we write a constructor here. So we can write the default constructor. We can also have parameterized constructor out here, just like we did in the parent class. And in the parent class, let's assume we write the default constructor as well. Now let's see what happens. So when we create an instance of this class B by saying new B, it comes into this constructor, but notice that we have not written any call to the parent constructor. Now in this case what happens is, the compiler will insert a call to the parent constructor at the beginning of this constructor, and to make a call to the parent constructor, super call is used. Okay, so the compiler inserts the super call at the beginning of the constructor. We need not write it. So it inserts, if we do not write, the compiler inserts the super call likewise. So when we create an instance of the subclass, the parent constructor gets called, and by default always the compiler inserts the super call for the default constructor. So always the parent default constructor gets called unless and until we specify so. Okay, so therefore the default constructor of the parent gets invoked, and once it finishes executing, the parent constructor comes back to the child constructor to further execute the other instructions specified. Now let's assume that in the parent class, okay, we write a parameterized constructor likewise. In that case, when we create an instance of the subclass, and let's assume there is no super call here, right? We are just writing f is equal to x in our child constructor. Remember, the compiler is going to insert the super call to the parent constructor. The super call that the compiler inserts is super off without any parameter. But now the problem is, in the parent class there is no default constructor since you have written a parameterized constructor. So you end up getting a compiler error. So in such cases, you must always provide explicitly the super call in your child constructor, since there is no default constructor in the parent. And the super call has to be specified as the very first instruction in the constructor. So now, since we have in the parent class the constructor which takes an int parameter, you need to make a call to the parent constructor passing some int parameter. If you were to have a default constructor as well in the parent class, apart from your parameterized constructor, then it is not necessary for you to write the super call unless and until you want to explicitly make a call to the parameterized constructor. So if you do not have a default constructor in the parent class, you must always have a super call in the child constructors. If that is your design where in the parent you are not going to specify any default constructor. Otherwise, if you have a default constructor, you can specify the super call to a parameterized constructor or leave it in your child constructor without specifying the super call. Then it will automatically call to the parent constructor, which is a default constructor. So this is how it works between a child and parent class as far as constructors go. So now this particular child class not only has this floatf, the disp function and its constructors, but it has also inherited all the variables and the methods and the constructors from the parent class. So once you create an instance of class B, using the instance of class B, you can access the variable of the child class, the variable of the parent, provided we have the scope. We will talk about scopes later. Let's just assume right now that we can access everything, and their methods. So you can access any member of the parent and the child. Now let's assume that we have int I in the child class as well. Now just before that, let's say in the disp method, if I were to say I is equal to 5, which I are we talking about out here? Previously we did not have this particular I in the child. So the I that we are talking about here comes from the parent class. Or if we were to invoke the set method here, which set method are we talking about? Since we don't have any set method in the child class, we are talking about the set method of the parent, right? So now let's come back to defining int I in the child class. Now the I that we talk about is the I of B and not that of A. Whatever is locally available is the one which it accesses. So if you want to access the I of A right now, you need to use what is known as a super keyword or the super reference. So you say super dot I is equal to 5. Now this refers to the I of the parent. When we talk about super, it's the immediate parent. Similarly, methods can also be specified in the child. The same method can also be specified in the parent. Now let's say we also have void set here in the child class. Now when we call set here, it will call the set of the child and not the set of the parent. If you want to again access the set of the parent, you need to say super dot set here, right? Now when you define a method which is same as the method of the parent, it is called as function overriding. So function overriding can occur only between parent and child classes. There should be a parent and child relationship for function overriding to occur. Function overriding is basically redefining a function which has been defined in the parent class. When you override a function in the child, you're redefining the entire functionality of the parent. Now, if I were to take this object and call a set method here, it's going to invoke this set rather than a set method, right?